in and to get more analysis for us. So when it comes to that meeting that is underway at the UN Security Council, we're now joined by SABC News US correspondent Shawan Bryce-Pease, and he joins us now via our video link. And Shawan, I mean, one would say, just listening to those submissions from both parties, it seems as if there's a blame game here going on.
Yeah, and they placed the United Nations Charter at the center. Essentially, Israel's ambassador Gilad Erdan arguing in the council that Iran has violated the tenets of the UN Charter and violated international law by sending those aerial strikes, some 300 unmanned aerial vehicles, ballistic and cruise missiles, which largely were intercepted. Some 99% were intercepted by Israel's defense capacities. But in Bali earlier, we were also talking about what happens next, right? And we were seeking clarity from those speeches by both the Iranian and Israeli envoys. So I think it's worth reminding you what the Israeli ambassador said. He said Iran was on the verge of becoming a nuclear weapons state. Of course, this is a red line for Israel. They called on the Security Council to oppose all measure of sanctions on Iran. He raised the question, what would you do if you were in Israel's shoes? How would you react? This attack crossed every red line. We are not a frog, he said, in boiling water. We are a nation of lions. We will defend our future. Iran can no longer hide behind its proxies. Today, the Council must take action, condemn, and sanction Iran. Saeed Erivani, the Iranian ambassador, spoke a short time ago. He said Iran was essentially in Bali responding to an attack on its diplomatic mission in Damascus, Syria on April 1st. It said its reaction was proportionate and that they targeted military installations to reduce civilian harm. He criticized the United States for being critical of Iran's response to Israel, but for allowing Israel's, quote, genocidal campaign against the people of Gaza. He said it was Iran's inherent right under international law and that UN Charter to respond to the attack on its diplomatic missions. It called on the Security Council to condemn Israeli actions and to bring perpetrators to justice for that attack that, of course, killed several commanders of Iran's Revolutionary Guard at the consulate in Syria. He also criticized in Bali the UN Security Council for failing in its duty to uphold international peace and security by not condemning Israel's actions on April 1st. And it says the absence of that council condemnation deemed it necessary for Iran to respond in this way. So the broad sentiment here is that Iran says we had the right to do this, but we do not want to escalate any further. Israel saying we're going to hold our cards close to our chest and let you know when we're ready to respond.
And Shawan, something that you also pointed out to a bit earlier on was the issue of taking responsibility for that attack on the 1st of April in Damascus in Syria. And something, that was quite notable, Israel also there not taking any responsibility whatsoever for that.
I mean, what we've learned from listening to, opposing parties in the Security Council in instances of this nature is that you stick to your talking points and I'll stick to mine. And so the Iranians are saying you attacked us first. Israel is completely ignoring that and saying that Iran has for years now, if not decades, played a destabilizing role in the broader Middle East region through various proxies and armed groups that Israel believes Iran is funding. Iran's ambassador a short time ago said that they are not responsible for the actions of essentially, people that are resisting, freedom fighters in a sense, that are, going up against the Israeli military in that region. And so you have these very divergent narratives, and you see how council members kind of, seek to be neutral or fall on either side of that. They either support the Israeli position or they support the Iranian position. And so the difficulty in a moment like this for the Security Council that must act collectively, right? If you agree a statement or a presidential statement or a resolution for that matter, it takes consensus around the table. And so if the question is, what does the Security Council do next, or what can we expect? We expect a lot of talking, but we won't necessarily have a collective unitary product out of the council to condemn either party here because of the divergent views you have heard from countries like China and countries like Russia and of course the United States that very vehemently supports Israel's actions in this case and in others, of course.
And taking a few notes there from Iran's ambassador, and of course saying that, of course, this was done in self-defense and also recognized by international law. I mean, what happens now, Sherwin? You are saying that we should just keep our ears glued to the ground in terms of, should we see some sort of escalation? Because it seems as if no one really is taking responsibility.
Well, Israel's envoy, essentially the Mbali, prefacing the fact that they are not necessarily going to be a frog in water, that they are lions and will defend itself. The clarity around the Israeli response is what is absent, I think, from this discussion and diplomatic discussions at the United Nations today, because Israel certainly won't preview how it will respond here. Certainly not to the extent that we knew that an Iranian strike was coming. The speculation out there is that Israel takes, its military action sometimes very covertly. Iran accusing Israel of the attack on its Syrian consulate in Damascus. But of course, as we talked about earlier, Israel not confirming that it was responsible for that attack. So, under the cloak and dagger scenario, how Israel responds is anyone's guess. But as the Israeli ambassador also pointed out, is that Israel is fighting, conflicts on multiple fronts. You'll know that Hezbollah in southern Lebanon to Israel's north has also engaged in cross-border skirmishes with the Israeli military vis-a-vis the Israeli military offensive in Gaza. And I think what you also heard from a number of speakers here is that the focus, of course, still needs to be on what is going on in Gaza. I think the representative of China talked about the flames of Gaza now spreading throughout the region, and that needs to be, brought back. The UN Secretary General, of course, speaking much earlier, talking about the Middle East and Bali being on the brink. Now is the time to defuse and to de-escalate. Now is the time for maximum restraint. And what we've heard out of the White House, which is Israel's biggest military and political backer in that region, is that they have said they will not support an Israeli counteroffensive against the Iranians here. And so it's very much left to Israel as to how they respond here. The international consensus is that they certainly do not want to see more of an escalation here. And then to lose sight of what the big issue is, and that's of course the Palestinian issue, efforts at the United Nations to create a Palestinian state and for full membership at the United Nations. And then, of course, arresting this conflict in Gaza, which has wrought such a devastating circumstance on over 2 million people that have now been trapped in this war and this conflict zone in the enclave of the Gaza Strip in Bali.
All right, Sherwin, thank you so much for that update. That's our U.S. correspondent, Sherwin Bryce-Peace, just giving us insight there in terms of hearing from the two countries at the UN Security Council meeting, which is currently underway. And